Once, Baltimore's steel and shipyards powered half the city, drawing nearly 1 million residents and building entire neighborhoods around the rhythm of the factory whistle. But when that industrial engine stalled, the same concentration that made Baltimore strong left it dangerously exposed. Today, the city's reputation is stuck, caught between world-class assets and vacant blocks, while its real story is more complicated than outsiders ever see. How does a place this vital become defined by loss, and what is really keeping it from breaking free? Baltimore's rise was no accident of geography or luck. At the heart of the city, a dense network of factories, shipyards, and rail lines pulsed with activity, shaping the city's very layout. Steel mills like Sparrow's Point sprawled across the waterfront, their smokestacks visible for miles. Shipyards lined the harbor, launching vessels that would cross oceans, rail tracks threaded through neighborhoods, carrying raw materials in and finished goods out. In the mid-20th century, this industrial engine employed 1 in 3 workers in the city, a level of concentration few other American cities could match. The city's daily rhythm was set by the factory whistle. Shift changes sent waves of workers pouring into the streets, filling streetcars and buses timed to the minute. Entire neighborhoods grew around these jobs, with rows of brick houses packed tightly together so workers could walk to the mill or the yard. Corner stores, union halls, and diners flourished, supported by the steady paychecks of thousands. Municipal services, schools, and even political power clustered close to the industrial belt. The city's tax base, its infrastructure, and its sense of stability all depended on the health of this concentrated engine. When Sparrow's Point ordered the construction of over 10,000 housing units for its workforce, it was not just building homes, it was building a city within a city, anchored by the promise of steady work. This alignment of jobs, housing, and public life produced a kind of urban gravity, pulling people and resources inward, binding neighborhoods together around the certainty of work. The result was a city that felt strong, stable, and self-contained, yet all of it rested on the same tightly wound core. Inside the row houses that lined Baltimore's working neighborhoods, life moved to a steady, confident beat. A steelworker's paycheck or a shipbuilder's wage meant more than just covering bills. It supported a full circle of local life. Families could count on a union contract that brought above-average wages, health benefits, and the promise that a job today would still be there tomorrow. The morning routine often started early, with workers grabbing coffee at the corner diner before walking to the plant. Children walked to neighborhood schools, knowing their classmates' parents worked at the same mill or yard. Saturdays meant errands at the local grocer, a stop at the hardware store, and maybe picking up a new pair of shoes from a shop run by a neighbor. Union halls doubled as community centers, hosting weddings and holiday dances. The security of steady employment shaped expectations. Families bought homes, sent kids to college, and planned for retirement, all on the strength of a single sector. Local businesses thrived because paychecks flowed reliably from factory floors to main streets. Even city politics and public services reflected this stability. Municipal leaders negotiated contracts and set budgets with the confidence that the tax base would hold. But this sense of security was always tied to the fortunes of a few dominant industries. Beneath the surface, the city's stability rested on a narrow foundation. For many families, the line between comfort and hardship was only as strong as the next contract negotiation, or the continued hum of the mill. The community's fabric was tightly woven, but vulnerable to any tear in the industrial engine that held it together. In 1971, the first shock hit Baltimore's industrial engine. 3,000 workers at Sparrow's Point, men and women who had spent years on the line, were told they no longer had jobs. The news landed hard in the break rooms and at kitchen tables in Dundalk and Curtis Bay. Paychecks that had once arrived like clockwork simply stopped. For families who had counted on union wages and steady benefits, the future suddenly looked uncertain. Layoffs were not just numbers in a headline. They meant a father explaining to his kids why the holiday plans had changed, or a neighbor quietly packing up after missing mortgage payments. Corner stores and union halls that once buzzed with shift workers grew quieter. The sense of stability that had held entire neighborhoods together began to slip away. Behind the closed gates, the reasons for the cuts were bigger than Baltimore. Steel from overseas was flooding into American ports, undercutting prices and shrinking orders at home. Sparrows Point, once the largest steel mill in the country, found itself losing ground to Japanese and European competitors. The mill's managers, pressured by shareholders and falling profits, trimmed payrolls to stay afloat. Just 4 years later, another 7,000 jobs vanished. The ripple effects spread far beyond the plant. Local diners lost their breakfast rush. Hardware stores watched regulars disappear. Even city services felt the pinch as tax revenue fell. For workers who had built their lives around the promise of steady employment, the layoffs felt like a breach of trust. The old certainty that a good job at the mill could anchor a family for generations was gone. In its place grew a quiet anxiety as people wondered how much more could be lost and what would happen if the world kept changing faster than they could catch up. Ownership churn swept through Baltimore's factories in the decades after the first mass layoffs. At Sparrows Point, the old promise of steady work gave way to a revolving door of corporate buyers and distant investors. In 2001, Bethlehem Steel, once the 8th largest company in the United States, filed for bankruptcy. The fallout was immediate and personal. Nearly 95,000 retirees and dependents saw their pensions and health benefits slashed by the new owner, Wilbur Ross. For families who had counted on those benefits, the loss hit as hard as any pink slip. Ross quickly sold off the company's assets, and the plant changed hands several more times. Each new owner brought more uncertainty, more concessions, and more job cuts. By the time the last steel rolled off the line, only a fraction of the original workforce remained. In 2015, the final act played out in plain sight when the 320-foot L blast furnace, once the largest in the Western Hemisphere, was brought down in a controlled implosion and reduced to twisted metal. The physical erasure of the furnace was more than symbolic. It left a scar where Baltimore's industrial heart had stood for nearly a century. The city's manufacturing collapse wasn't limited to steel. In 2005, General Motors shut down its 70-year-old van assembly plant in Baltimore, cutting over 1,000 jobs in a single announcement. Like Sparrows Point, the plant was stripped and sold off. The site would eventually reopen as a logistics hub, but the new jobs offered lower wages and fewer protections than the union contracts of the past. As plants shuttered, assets liquidated, and pensions vanished, the city lost more than payrolls. The old anchors of working-class life were pulled up and sold to the highest bidder, leaving behind acres of vacant land and a deep sense of abandonment. For many, the implosion of the blast furnace was not just the end of an era. It was the moment Baltimore's industrial identity was erased piece by piece by decisions made in distant boardrooms. Baltimore's population peaked at nearly 950,000 residents in 1950. Over the next 70 years, nearly 1 out of every 3 people left the city. By 2020, the census counted just over 585,000, a loss of more than 360,000 people. This exodus was not just a matter of empty houses. It set off a financial chain reaction that still shapes the city today. The city's infrastructure, roads, water mains, schools, police, and fire stations was built for a metropolis of almost 1 million. Those costs do not shrink just because the population does. Water and sewer systems stretch across the same miles, even as vacant blocks multiply. Schools built for 120,000 students now serve barely 75,000, straining to keep doors open as classrooms empty out. Fire and emergency medical services crews cover neighborhoods where half the houses may be boarded up, yet the risk of emergencies remains. The city's fixed costs, maintaining 3,200 miles of water pipes, 1,100 miles of streets, and dozens of public buildings, keep rising even as the tax base erodes. With fewer people paying property taxes, and many properties left vacant or abandoned, city revenue fell far faster than expenses. Baltimore's annual budget reports show the squeeze. Deferred maintenance piles up, repairs wait, and basic services stretch thin. Comptrollers warn of a growing gap between what the city must provide and what it can actually afford. The result is a city built for the past, struggling to pay for the present, and forced to make hard choices about which services survive. The numbers tell the story. A city designed for 900,000, now trying to function with barely 2/3 of that number, and the bills have not shrunk to match. Lines drawn on maps nearly a century ago still shape Baltimore's neighborhoods today. In the 1930s, federal officials from the Homeowners Loan Corporation, called HOLC, surveyed the city and graded each area for mortgage risk. On those maps, entire swaths of East and West Baltimore were outlined in red and labeled hazardous for investment, often because black families or immigrants lived there. These red-lined zones were cut off from mainstream credit, home loans, and public investment, regardless of the condition of individual homes or the stability of the families inside them. Decades of official disinvestment followed. Banks refused mortgages, city services were scaled back, and landlords neglected repairs. Meanwhile, wealthier neighborhoods, often marked green or blue on the same maps, attracted new schools, parks, and infrastructure upgrades. Over time, these boundaries hardened into economic barriers. The city's own data shows a direct overlap. Today's clusters of vacant row homes and abandoned lots trace the same lines as the old redlining maps. The neighborhoods left out of investment then are the same ones struggling with vacancy and disrepair now. Housing scholars studying the Mapping Inequality Project point to Baltimore as a textbook example of how federal policy can create lasting vulnerability. When the industrial economy faltered, redlined neighborhoods had little cushion. Families who might have built equity elsewhere were left exposed to every shock, including job loss, population flight, and the slow withdrawal of city services. The result is a city where resilience and decline are mapped as much by history as by present-day choices. After decades of economic shocks and neighborhood division, a new problem began to shape Baltimore's future, one that could not be measured by census data or city budgets alone. In April 2015, national attention zeroed in on Baltimore after unrest broke out following Freddie Gray's death in police custody. For weeks, headlines and cable news cycles painted the city in stark, unyielding terms: violence, chaos, failure. The images spread quickly, reinforced by a surge in negative coverage across major outlets. According to media tracking, the volume of national stories about Baltimore's crime and disorder more than doubled in the months after the unrest. The city's name became shorthand for crisis, and that label stuck. Local journalists noticed the shift. One longtime reporter described how even positive developments struggled to break through a wave of stories focused on dysfunction. In interviews, business owners and developers reported new hesitancy from investors, citing insurance hikes, stalled projects, and out-of-town partners suddenly worried about risk. National firms reconsidered expansions. Convention planners and tourists canceled trips, pointing directly to safety fears stoked by headlines. The reputation became a cost all its own, making it harder for real improvements to gain traction. Even as some neighborhoods saw renewed investment, the narrative of decline overshadowed progress, feeding a cycle where perception discouraged the very recovery the city needed. In Baltimore, the story told about the city began to shape its economic reality. It created a feedback loop where image and outcome grew harder to separate. Port cranes rise above the Patapsco River, moving containers day and night. The Port of Baltimore ranks among the busiest on the East Coast, handling millions of tons of cargo every year: cars, farm equipment, steel, and bulk goods that flow through the city's terminals to markets across the country. According to the Maryland Port Administration, more than 15,000 jobs depend directly on port operations, while thousands more work in trucking, warehousing, and the logistics chain that stretches deep into the region. The port generates over $3 billion in business output each year, making it one of Baltimore's most important economic engines. A few miles north, the campus of Johns Hopkins stands as another anchor. The university and its hospital employ over 50,000 people in the city, not just in medicine and research, but in everything from food service to construction. Each year, Johns Hopkins spends hundreds of millions on research, money that supports startups, tech labs, and a steady stream of new graduates. This institutional presence has kept a section of Baltimore's economy resilient, even as other industries faded. Yet these engines of growth exist beside neighborhoods still marked by vacancy and struggle. The port's cranes and the glass towers of Hopkins represent stability and promise, but their reach is uneven. In Baltimore, world-class assets and fragile blocks can sit side by side, divided by little more than a few streets. On one side of Baltimore, glass towers and bustling streets define the waterfront neighborhoods of Harbor East and Canton. New restaurants open, condos fill up, and retail corridors buzz with energy. Property values have climbed steadily in these districts, drawing young professionals and outside investors. The waterfront feels renewed and active. A few blocks away, in West Baltimore, the scene is starkly different. Rows of vacant houses stretch for miles, windows boarded and stoops empty. In some neighborhoods, more than a third of homes stand abandoned, and corner stores operate between empty lots and shuttered storefronts. Residents in these areas say they feel left behind as city resources and investment cluster elsewhere. The numbers reflect this split. While parts of the city have seen hundreds of millions in new development, vacancy rates in other neighborhoods remain among the highest in the country. Even as Baltimore's overall homicide rate fell by nearly 20% over the past 2 years, the decline is uneven. Some neighborhoods see real progress, while others still struggle with daily violence. Community leaders describe a city living two realities at once, where hope and hardship exist side by side. The promise of renewal has yet to reach every block. The question of who benefits from progress remains unresolved, hanging over the city's future. Today, Baltimore remains a city where a world-class port and flagship hospital's border blocks still marked by vacancy, a split visible in every census map and investment chart. National narratives still shape where dollars and trust flow. As new cranes rise along the waterfront, the real test is whether progress can cross old lines. The future depends on whether perception remains a barrier or becomes a challenge the city finally overcomes.